after everybody finished. I thought it'd be easier.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Is this on? Testing, testing. Is this one on? Oh, testing. All right, this one's on.
Okay. Yeah, she said everything's
All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for coming out. Deborah, thank you so much for organizing this and coordinating it. It's always an opportunity to come to different parts of the state and be with other people that are interested in the direction of our country and what we can do to make sure we are going in the correct direction, the right direction. And a lot of that starts with knowledge of our history, how we got to where we are, and so that we can know where we want to end up. It's important because, there's the famous phrase, age-old adage of those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. And we've seen these failures and these mistakes that have been made time and time again. And America is currently going down this path, whether you realize it or not, towards socialism.
Yes.
And it used to just be kind of this creeping socialism, but now it seems like they have really put the pedal to the metal and they are flooring it, trying to accelerate as quickly as possible because they know their time is limited. So they're trying to make the best use of their time that they can. And for those of you that don't know my background, I actually grew up overseas. My parents were missionaries. I grew up in the formerly communist nation of Romania. It was still very communistic and socialist at that time when we moved over there. So I've seen where we can be, or where we could end up if we don't change course quickly. And education is an important aspect of that. Communists, Marxists realize that. They realize that if you get the people when they are young, if you get young people, if you get them indoctrinated, if you get them to believe the propaganda, that you can have them for life. It's a lot harder to break through that when they've been taught a certain way. I'll give you an example. Did you know that Russia was first on the moon, Romania was second on the moon, and America was third on the moon? Because the Romanians all know that because that's what they were taught in their public schools. They absolutely fundamentally believe that Russia was first on the moon, Romania was second on the moon, and America was third. When you ask them about it, like, well, have you seen any pictures or any video or whatever? Well, we read about it in our textbook. Romanians also invented the hair comb. They also were the first to actually fly. Not the Wright brothers. They were the first to fly in 1929. Which was a few decades after the Wright brothers, but their history books taught them that they were the first to have manned flight. And they absolutely fundamentally believe it because the government had full, total control of their education system. And so that's what they grew up learning. They knew nothing else. Under communism, when they were walled off from the rest of the world, they were told, and they absolutely believed, that the reason they had walls was not to keep them in, but to keep the rest of the world out. Because Romania was the greatest country in the world. And if they took down their walls, the entire world's population of, at that point in time, 4 or 5 billion people would come flooding into Romania and there wouldn't be any room for anyone. And those who had traveled and been to other countries knew that to be true. But within one generation's time, within 10 to 20 years of having full, total communist government control of the education system, the young people had no idea. Because they didn't know anything else. Because they didn't have education freedom. They didn't have knowledge. They didn't have truth. All they had was what they were taught. And I'm not trying to say that I'm anti-public education. I was homeschooled when we moved over to Romania. I went to public schools when I lived here in Oklahoma. So a lot of times, those that are involved in public school, public education, kind of brand me as being anti-public education, thinking I was just homeschooled. They neglect to look at the fact that I actually experienced both public school and homeschooling. And I remember one time when I was over in Romania, I realized that I had probably been fed some propaganda when I was going to public school here in Oklahoma. Because we were driving down the road, my dad was driving, I was 11 years old at the time, I still remember this, and I said, America is the largest polluter in the world. Because that's what I'd been taught in public school. So it had to be true, right? Well, interestingly enough, no sooner had I said those words than a diesel truck driving down the other lane in the road came barreling past us, spewing so much black smoke that it engulfed our car, and we had to stop the vehicle because we couldn't see what other cars were around us. And I thought, as an 11-year-old child, I don't remember ever seeing that in Oklahoma or anywhere else in America, but America's the worst polluter in the world. How is that possible? This doesn't make sense. The roads in Romania are lined with trash, but America's the worst polluter in the world? This doesn't really make sense. And that was my first kind of aha moment that maybe everything that I was taught wasn't factually correct. And so that's why it's so important that we get to the truth, because the truth is what sets people free. And so much of what is taking place in education in this day and age is teaching a specific set of information, a lot of it not even being factual, because they have a preconceived concept, an idea of where they want to get. How many of you remember learning about evolution? Okay? How many of you remember learning about it when it was the theory of evolution? It's no longer taught as a theory of evolution. It's taught as evolution, because that gives it the premise of being factual. However, nobody was there when this supposed theory took place. This supposed theory has never been proven. In fact, this theory is contrary to the established science, but it's still taught as fact in our schools, right? And we're trying to work on it to where we can actually teach the controversy of evolution, teach the other side, teach intelligent design. However, right now there is mostly a monopoly on being able to educate and teach young people. So if you look at these things, you see that there is a specific design to keep people either misinformed or ill-informed about specific things, especially the truth. And if you look at the history of American education, if you look at the Puritans and what they did, you know, a lot of times people will say, well, America has had compulsory education since the 1600s. That's true to a degree, okay? If you look at what was done with the Puritans, this was before America was founded, before there was the United States. This was when they were colonies, the Massachusetts Bay Colony. In I believe it was 32, might have been 42, that they passed what was considered the first compulsory education requirement. But what it said is it said that parents had to teach their children, or they had to get a tutor or someone else to do it. It wasn't just that, hey, we're going to have government schools. That's what's being propagandized and told to us, is that that's when government schools were first founded. Well, that wasn't fully enforced. And the reason that first came about was because Massachusetts Bay Colony at that time, yes, there were a lot of Puritans, but there were a lot of people that were coming over there for the business side of things, looking for the economic freedom, looking to actually make money. And so they didn't have that biblical faith foundation that the Puritans had. They believed that truth sets people free, so children need to be educated in the truth. And so they saw these other people coming over without that foundation. And they said, well, these people need to also be able to understand reading and writing and these different things so that they can read the truth of God's word, and that these young children can be raised up in the right way, even if they're not of the Puritans, of our church or our faith. They need to be taught these things. And so that's why they initially passed that act. 5 years later, they passed another act. It was called Ye Old Deluder Satan Act. And it's famous for that because the opening phrase of it says, the deluder Satan, he who spreads lies and deludes people, wanting to keep people ignorant and unable to be capable of reading God's word, because that is an issue facing our colony. This is what we're going to do. And they required every town that had 50 families or 50 households that they get together and they hire a teacher. Again, not necessarily the government doing it, the people of that town, the families of that town, hiring a teacher. And then, if they had 100 or more, they had to have a grammar school, essentially an elementary school for those children. But again, it was done by the individual's families. They were responsible for it. But if you look at what they were being educated back in that day, this is the 1600s. They didn't learn the 3 R's. How many of you remember the 3 R's? Reading, writing, and arithmetic, right? Okay, we don't even teach those hardly anymore in schools in this day and age. But back then they actually had 4 R's. Reading, writing, arithmetic, and religion. They actually covered that in the schools. They covered God's Word. They would discuss that. That was the main focus. In fact, that's what they would use to teach reading and writing, was God's Word. So, but then when they got to grammar school, they not only learned those and learned advanced arithmetic, they also learned Latin and Greek. We barely teach English in our education today in our elementary schools. This was the elementary schools back then where they were teaching Greek and Latin. Why? So these people could read the classics. So they could read in the original languages of those that wrote these foundational documents that so impacted the creation of the United States. So when they go to talk about, that we've had compulsory education, since the 1600s, well, that was parents' choice. That was effectively school choice, because the parents got to decide who the teacher was that was hired to teach their children. Does that happen in public schools here in America? I mean, yes, if a teacher is doing something wrong, potentially, eventually, you could get them out the next year and not have them rehired. But in determining who your teacher is that's going to teach your child, that's almost unheard of in this day and age. So when they talk about that it was compulsory education, it really wasn't, and it was still parental involvement. The parents were still very much involved in deciding who it was that was going to be educating and teaching their children. And the first law was actually the responsibility of the parent to educate the child. That's something that we've lost. So when we talk about education in America, yes, we were founded on educational freedom, but we were founded on parental involvement in the education system, because the family unit is one of the core principles of what can of a nation going the right direction. And that's why Marxists and communists and socialists fight so hard to destroy the family unit. They fight family and they fight God, because those are the 2 cornerstones that will help a nation go in the right direction. And they replace those 2 things, family and God, in one thing with public schools. And again, I'm not anti-public school, but with these public schools, they're government. And those on the left have replaced God with government. They worship the state. They worship government. That's why those in government are often beyond reproach in their eyes and their minds. But then also, they've replaced the responsibility of the parents and the family with educating the students, again, with those government schools. That is a part of the Marxist philosophy in taking down a country. And if you look at our modern educational system with John Dewey, has very much socialist roots. And I know Senator Boulder could talk to this even more, and I hope he will hit on some of this, on some of the propaganda and stuff. But I'll give you an example. How many of you, when you went to school, studied history? Right? You know what they study now? Social studies. Social studies. Not history. Social studies. That is part of the rebranding, the changing of the names, the subversion of the language that they are trying to implement by taking over the education system, because they know, and I'm not crediting him in this and saying that it was a positive thing, but Hitler was quoted as saying the one reason that he had the Hitler Youth was because when you get them when they're young, you will keep them for life. This is a part of whether you want to call it the fascists, the Marxists, the big government plan to take over education and long-term change the trajectory of a nation. That's what they are trying to accomplish here. Now, regarding Oklahoma, our Constitution, originally created in 1907, we do have some compulsory education requirements here in the state of Oklahoma, essentially. our Oklahoma Constitution does quote, or does require some compulsory education, but it also has a provision for homeschooling. We actually have one of the strongest homeschooling provisions or opportunities here in this state. But what a lot of people don't realize is that the compulsory part of our Constitution only says that the legislature must provide free education here in Oklahoma, okay? Well, first of all, government can't offer anything for free, so that's an oxymoron to say that it's going to be free education, okay? That it should say at no cost to the parents or something, but even at that, if they pay property taxes, they're still paying for it. So that provision is an oxymoron anyways, but it says that yes, that we have to provide free public education. But then beyond that, it actually puts a separate provision in the Oklahoma Constitution. It says that we have to provide that education for those ages 8 to 16 for a minimum of 3 months a year. That is what is required for compulsory education here in the state of Oklahoma. We now offer K2 to, K14, 9-10 months out of the year. We offer far above and beyond what is required. So when they constantly say that we're underfunding education, well, we are providing a whole lot more educational opportunities than is required by the Constitution. Secondly, there's actually a provision in the Oklahoma Constitution that says how much we are supposed to fund each student each year. Does anybody want to guess how much it says that we're supposed to fund each student each year? $43 per student based on last year's enrollment. And I know most people will be like, well, okay, yeah, but that was 1907. I mean, yeah, $43 went a long way back in 1907. If it was 1907, you would be correct. However, that was passed by a vote of the people in 1984. $42 didn't go a long way in 1984, did it? I believe it was 84. It was in the 80s, in the early 80s. But that was actually put in by a vote of the people. So when they say that we are underfunding education, that we are not following the compulsory education guidelines, we are going far above and beyond what is required by our Constitution. However, I still am a firm believer in school choice, or better put, parental choice. I think the money should follow the child because that was the original intent. And we've seen in other states, other counties, other cities that have done that, how beneficial it has been when the parents can direct the funding for their students and the direction of their students. Because the state, as much as statists believe that the child belongs to the government, no, that child belongs to those parents, to that family. And for the state, for leftists to have the audacity to say that they know what's better for 90% of the children in Oklahoma than the parents know what's best for them is just so disgusting that they believe that. Because the majority, yes, I did tone that down, Senator Boulder. I paused for a minute. Yes. I can't actually restrain myself on occasion when I do pause. Yeah, but that's essentially what they're saying. Because the vast majority of students go to public schools here in Oklahoma, and they believe that they should be able to direct your child's life, trajectory. We're even seeing it to the point to where they believe they should be able to do predetermined testing and outcomes of what job your child should be able to get. And I'm not saying that I'm opposed to testing and some of those things so they can find their aptitudes and what they're interested in. But they don't want to just find that out. They want to direct where your child works. And I've seen that firsthand. That's what the communists did. They actually uprooted people from rural areas, brought them in and put them in apartments in cities, and said, you are going to work at this factory because we as the state know what's best for you. And it's despicable. And I know people will say it can never happen here. But let me point out something. Because again, those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it. How many of you have heard of this little island off the coast of Florida called Cuba? Okay, right? Have you heard that right now that there's some people there that are protesting? Okay? Now those on the left would tell us that they're protesting because they don't have COVID vaccines. But I'm not that great in Spanish, but I'm pretty sure that libertad does not mean I want more COVID vaccines. I'm pretty sure libertad means liberty, right? And so the people of Cuba are are rallying against their communist government, that regime, right? How many of you realize that Cuba used to be an American territory? We won it in the Spanish-American War. It was part of what we received. It was an American territory. This is a former part of America that is under communism still today and has been for decades. Yes, we gave them their freedom. Yes, a dictator came in and took over with communism, killed however many thousands of people. But that is a formerly part of America where this has taken place. So to believe it can't happen here is ignorance of history. So we have to be knowledgeable of our history, and America's history is based on educational freedom, and there's a reason that this is so much under attack. And yes, I will tell you, there are a lot of pressing battles that we need to have right here, right now, things that we need to fight. Senator Bullard did an awesome job on House Bill 1775, stopping critical race theory. We absolutely needed to do that. That was a huge victory. But we also have to realize that not only do we have to fight those battles right now to stop their advancement, we have to do things to take ground back. And we have to change the trajectory. So some of these battles are short-term victories. Some of these things will require long-term change. And one of the best ways we can do and affect long-term change is by taking over the education system, redirecting the education system, letting parents take over their education dollars and direct where their student goes, where their child goes. We can make some of those changes that, yes, those will have lasting impacts 20, 30 years down the road, but I guarantee you the communists and Marxists are thinking 20, 30 years down the road. They've been working to implement critical race theory for decades. They've been working towards these things, these end goals for a long time. Communism is based in the principle of class separation. Marxism, they try to separate you into classes. That doesn't work here in America because we have a booming middle class. It's quickly disappearing because of government influence and government interference, but we still have a middle class. In other countries, they don't. They have the super wealthy, and then they have those in abject poverty, right? Here in America, we have the super wealthy, the very wealthy, the wealthy, those that are poor, and yes, we have some in abject poverty as well. But we have such a wide range, and we have the American dream of, I can go from one group to the next. I can succeed if I apply myself. We have that, other countries don't. That's why Marxism has worked so well in these other countries by dividing by class, that the workers will rise up and seize the means of production. That hasn't worked here. So what are they doing instead? They found other classes to separate us by. Gender, right? Color of our skin, right? They're trying to cause these divisions, and that's what critical race theory was about, was using that to try to cause this division. So we have to understand what they are trying to accomplish so that we can stop it. And that's what we did with banning critical race theory. But we still have to, the main thing we have to do is we have to take back the educational structure, because that is, in my opinion, one of the number one things that they are using to try to direct the outcome of this country to change it into a socialist or communist country. So it's important that we understand our past, understand the history, that we were founded on educational freedom. It's important that we understand that even those that claim that Oklahoma has compulsory school attendance, yes it does, but the amount of money we're spending and the amount of time we're investing in that is far above and beyond what is required. And even at that, it doesn't say how it has to be done. So if we wanted to, and I'm not saying we could ever get this passed, we could require compulsory attendance at private schools, or at charter schools, or whatever. There's other options and opportunities for that. So for those that would claim that this is the only way that we have to have this system here in Oklahoma, that's not true. And so we need to get back to educational independence of the families, with the parents having the first choice of where they send their students. It's based on our history throughout the United States, and even here in Oklahoma, because our Constitution says that yes, we have that compulsory education unless other means of education are provided. That means homeschooling. So we do have a provision in there. So we have to get back to educational freedom, not just from our history, but for our future. I'd asked Deborah about Q&A. We're going to do Q&A at the end, so if you have any questions, please keep them in mind, or write them down, and if I don't get a chance to answer it afterwards, I'll stick around a little bit afterwards and make sure to answer questions.
Okay.
But thank you all for having me out. Deborah, thank you so much again for organizing.